You're listening to How to Win Friends and Save the Republic, a podcast from the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. I'm your host, Andy Moore. My guest today is Debliyn Molineaux. Debliyn grew up in Colorado Springs and moved to Fresno, California as a young adult. She started her career as a small business owner, working with community businesses to promote and grow their own operations through advertising and marketing. After engaging with other women business leaders, Debliyn was inspired to become more active in the political process. Her name, I think, is synonymous with terms like cross-partisan, bridge building, conversation, dialogue. If you Google her, you will likely see her as the director, the founder, or an advisor to almost every organization in the space that is working on these things. She's helped found things like Living Room Conversations, the National Conversation Project, Coffee Party USA, and more, all of which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. In 2015, Debliyn co-founded the Bridge Alliance to harness this growing field of organizations into what is a game-changing movement that shifts the underlying dynamics of power, politics, and participation in our country. She's served as an advisor to the balanced news website, allsides.com, and is also now a co-publisher of The Fulcrum. She's on the board of our organization, the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, and has become a great friend of mine. I'm so excited she's here today. Welcome to the show, Debliyn.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Now, as we do with all of our guests, I want to start in the beginning. Growing up in Colorado Springs, or maybe later in Fresno, what was politics important in your home? Working in the space or ancillary to the space now, is that something that has been baked in for you since your early days?
Yes and no. So politics wasn't like a big part of growing up. Neither of I'm the product of a divorced family, and back in the 70s, that was fairly unusual in the early 70s. And my mom and stepfather were my mom's traditional conservative, my stepfather was libertarian. And my dad and my stepmom were quite liberal. And what was interesting was, while we never really talked about politics, my dad tells the story that I knew that there were different rules. So when I was with my mom, I would act more like a conservative and libertarian, and when I was with my dad, I would act more like a liberal. And he tells a story about me saying, "I guess when I'm with my mom, I can be conservative, and when I'm with you, I can be liberal." And so I often joke that a lot of the work I do today is still family therapy to figure out how to bridge my two families.
Sure. Well, that is certainly something that speaks to me. I think I may have mentioned to listeners in a previous episode, but early in my career, I was a marriage counselor, and I guess I technically still am a licensed counselor. And so I've often joked, I think to you as well, that working in politics is like doing marriage counseling. You have two entities, at least, right, who don't get along, but know that they need to for the good of the family. And a lot of our job, right, here in the reform space, and certainly in the bridge building space, is to try to keep those people coming to sessions every week, right? Mm-hmm. It's somewhat related to that. I before we get into politics, I know that you have a kind of a background in ontology and coaching. That is to say, you're a ontologically trained coach, and you've used that skill and training to help guide organizations in new ways. Ontology being, kind of a branch of philosophy dealing with existence and the nature of being. I think of it as something related to existentialism and who we are, why we're here, and what it is we're supposed to be doing with our lives. And you've used that with organizations, and I think you still do, to kind of bring out, hidden talents and gifts and strengths of volunteers and staff. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got into that and how that shapes even what you do today?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief, because there's actually a very long, a longer story about this. But when I describe what ontology or ontological coaching is, I really try to get to the essence of why people are doing what they're doing, or the essence of why an organization exists to help make that more visible to the public, because the why is really the interesting part of our stories. And then the coaching comes in to really help people and organizations figure out the what to do about that so that the essence can shine through. And I only use the skill like every day. And the way I got into it really was as I was looking to get out of the advertising and marketing field, which I had been in for 13 or so years, and it felt like soul killing work to me. I looked around at what I can do, and I landed in this job as a consultant for a company to do a marketing campaign. And when I went in to help them figure out how to market, it was a logistics company. When I talked to them, it became very apparent to me that they were so broken internally that there was no promise they could make to the public that they could reasonably expect to keep. And so I said, we need to do some internal marketing. I kind of talked really fast and talked my way into this consulting gig. And then I left there after I got the job and called up a friend of mine who was an organizational development person and said, how do I do this? And that sent me into coaching school and into ontology, and the rest is history.
That's so interesting. We had John Pudner and Francis Johnson from Take Back Our Republic on the show a couple of weeks ago, and they had, I think, a similar, a realization in their life, right? They had been doing one type of work for a while and felt like something needed to change. And given the framing here, I think it speaks to all of our desire or our recognition that we need a different why, that either we've lost it or we need one that is more meaningful. And so applying that ontology to ourselves, right, and doing a little bit of introspection and perhaps acceptance of where we're at and where politics is today and how we fit into that world and how we can make it a little bit better. I think it makes a lot of sense to see your jump from the advertising world into not just helping people and businesses, but trying to help our democracy as a whole. So I went through your LinkedIn profile, to be honest, to try to identify what happened first in this journey to where you are today. And I think much like my own experience, there was a lot of overlapping timelines, right? With this evolution, the kind of growth of this idea spawns another idea, and they're connected for a while until one has to let go. So let's kind of just walk through it, if you'll be our guide, for what started first. I think it might have been living room conversations was one of the first things, but if that's wrong, please tell me.
Well, what's not on the LinkedIn profile is that while I was doing as I was getting out of advertising and marketing, I ran for public office. And when I ran for public office, I started getting involved in politics, and I ended up with this group of people under the auspices of a project called Reuniting America. And this is where I met, a couple of the founders of the space that you and I currently work in today, John Steiner and Mark Gerzon. And they were holding retreats of about 40 nonprofit leaders at the time under the Reuniting America brand. And they were off-site, like, where you didn't have cell phones and everything to distract you. And for 3 days, these people from across the political spectrum that all led politically connected nonprofit organizations would talk to each other and get to know each other as humans. And the way that I tell the story is that I came to my first meeting to kind of lead up or direct this Reuniting Women branch that ended up not panning out. It didn't ever gel into an actual group. But that evening, they were hosting an event at the National Council of Family Foundations, I think it was. So it was at their offices, and a whole bunch of people were coming in to hear a panel discussion and a little Q&A from the audience. And when I showed up at the door, everybody who with Reuniting America was busy setting stuff up, and there was and guests started arriving, and so I just played hostess and welcomed people into the space. And then they really couldn't get rid of me after that. I was already seen publicly as part of the team. So that was the actual first encounter that I had. And that's where I met Joan Blades. And then from meeting Joan Blades there, when she had this idea to start Living Room Conversations, I was the person she called to start that with her. And so that was probably 2 or 3 years later.
Yeah. And so Living Room Conversations is exactly what it sounds like. It's an organization that tries to build community by facilitating or even guiding dialogue and connection between people. And I like that, the website has certainly been updated in the last couple of years to reflect that your living room can be anywhere these days, right? It can be over Zoom or whatever service you'd like to use. But it's designed to be those small, close-knit conversations with people with whom you might disagree, and perhaps even intentionally with people with whom you disagree.
Most definitely. They're the more meaningful or the more revealing aha type conversations happen when you're with people with whom you disagree. The question around Living Room Conversations and why it was created was to really answer the question of that Joan was carrying at the time, which was, why don't more conservatives care about climate change? And then that expanded out to, well, why don't we have more curiosity about why people believe the way they believe things? And so that why was really critical to identify in the development of Living Room Conversations to help us understand better and explore with curiosity other people and their belief systems and facts, and really then also affirm our deep affection for one another and some level of caring so that we can remain a family.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of the television show The West Wing. One of my favorite characters is Ainsley Hayes, who's the Republican attorney they bring in to work in the White House counsel's office. And last night I was watching an episode from season 3 where her and Sam Seaborn once again get into a yelling match about Republicans versus Democrats and why they disagree on things. And they both are telling the other person, well, you believe in this, this, and this. And then they, retort. But those are always followed by scenes of reconnection about, well, this is why we're all in this building together, working together, because there is still some shared ideology, some shared goals, and a hope for the future. And it's, the show has excellent writing. This is all fictitious, but it I think, as a helpful, artful tool to remind us that there's more that unites us than divides us.
I'll take you one West Wing and raise you a Boston Legal with the balcony scenes at the end of every episode. Yeah.
Man, I forgot all about those. I bet there's a supercut on YouTube somewhere I could go watch.
I bet there is, because, man, that connection between the two, the liberal and the conservative lawyers just having a drink on the balcony at the end of the day really is something I wish America had a balcony to sit on right now.
Yeah, well, that just sounds nice because it's about 100 degrees here in my state, and I would like to be able to be outside and enjoy it. So after Living Room Conversations came a few different things. The National Conversation Project, Coffee Party USA was in there somewhere. For you, when you think about the rollout of your career, what comes next?
Yeah, there's connected. They're connected. So Coffee Party USA was founded by other folks, and I came in as an organizational development person with one of my team members who helped create Living Room Conversations, and we worked to help set up the infrastructure of Coffee Party, and then I became the first executive director there.
And we should say it wasn't actually a political party, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's so, and this is the funny thing, and the myth of origination stories, right? Everybody seems to think that the Coffee Party was created in response to the Tea Party, and they're half right and they're half wrong, because the Coffee Party was created by its founders in contrast to the rhetoric and the disruption that the Tea Party members were having at town halls, with this kind of feeling of like, why can't we just sit down over a cup of coffee and talk it out instead of having all of this disruption? So the tagline for Coffee Parties, incite civility and reason, is in kind of homage to, if you will, to that original intent. It turned out that the part of the myth that is not true is that it was meant to be a progressive only organization. And there's a lot of folks who still believe that to this day, and we'll probably never be able to convince them otherwise.
That makes me think of something that you and I talk about often in politics, right? Is that things get viewed through this duopoly or this didactic view of us or them. If this is a distinctly conservative movement, then something else that's similar must be the opposite, right? As if everything is designed to be diametrically opposed to one another. And that is often not the case. In fact, a lot of the work that you've been involved in has been trying to stand in the middle of multiple viewpoints and say, hey, y'all, like, why don't you all come here? And we're not playing a sport against one another where it's win or lose. Let's just come to the table and have a cup of coffee, have a drink on the balcony, just try to be civil for a little while, and let's see how far we get.
Yeah, although I have to confess that one of my colleagues calls what we do standing on the yellow line, the center line in the road, in the middle of traffic.
Sure, right. It's a dangerous place to be, that's for sure.
And but I really like what I really like, and I got this from my early years with my two different families, is seeing the humanity, the shared humanity in all of us, is to me the peaceful place where we can coexist. It doesn't mean I agree with my dad all the time. It doesn't mean I agree with my mom all the time. In fact, we disagree quite often. But having that sense of shared humanity and sense of family and bonds of affection with each other is, to me, the most healthy future we could create for our nation and for the world.
Sure, because we want this democracy to survive long after all of us are gone, right?
Yeah.
And to get there, we've got to do what we can to help it along the road.
Yeah. Hey, so I want to tap in real quick on the National Conversation Project.
Perfect.
Because I did co-found that. This was probably a few years ago, but it was way after the coffee party, after Bridge Alliance even. And it has since been absorbed into the Listen First Project, and they host a national campaign once a year called the National Week of Conversation. And so National Conversation Project was started in order to host and do campaigns for the collective bridging community.
Some people may know that as America Talks. There's kind of several terms and groups and movements that have coalesced there.
We confuse people with all the brands, but the essence is the same. Get out there, have a courageous conversation, and talk to somebody that feels other to you.
When I started at Nanner, it was kind of early in that National Week of Conversation, and it was really exciting to participate and to see how that played out and all the events that went along with that, where you had people coming together to have conversations, and perhaps by setting the expectations that you may be talking to folks with whom you might disagree, but the point is not to come to disagree necessarily. The point is to come and talk through that, right? Maybe ideally you will find some areas of agreement, but just the exercise of having that conversation is very important.
Correct. Yep. And figuring out, we need practice in this country, how to have conversations where we disagree, but we still remain friends. That's what we need to practice right now.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after a word from some of our sponsors.
This podcast is brought to you by IVN.us, an open news platform for independent-minded authors and readers. If you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe to IVN.us where you listen to podcasts. On SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, Acast, or iHeartRadio.
Hey, Unrig It listeners. I'm Emily Corsetti from The Purple Principle. How did our country get so polarized?
The rise of television news, the rise of social media, every single force is pushing us apart.
How do we get less partisan?
People have a lot more in common than they think they do on policy.
And can independent-minded Americans bridge the divide?
I think that there's value to having folks like me outside of the parties.
Take a 360-degree tour of partisanship with The Purple Principle, wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, and now back to the show. Well, let's talk about the Bridge Alliance. You helped co-found that, I think, in 2015. Does that sound?
That is correct.
Correct.
One of about 30 people.
Yeah, it was not a lone effort, right? This is, as everything in this movement, it's a collective effort of we need to build an entity to bring all of these groups, all of these movements, these people together to form an alliance of bridge builders.
Yeah, so the why, kind of picking up on that theme of why again, why Bridge Alliance? Bridge Alliance was started around this idea of what could we do better together. So the why was no single organization had enough time, talent, or resources to fix democracy by itself. So the why was what could we do better together that no single organization could do alone. And when we asked the kind of the initial meeting that was convened by Mark Gerzon and John Steiner, who I mentioned previously, and Mark had asked me to co-facilitate that group of 40 leaders that came into the room for this particular meeting said 100% we want to stay in touch and we think we should do something more. And then there was a smaller second meeting that was actually the formation of the Bridge Alliance.
Well, you and I think we probably had 3 calls this week discussing the democracy ecosystem and this, I think, process that we're in of understanding the landscape of the democracy reform movement. And there's like different territories, movements within that movement, right? And so there's the bridge building community, which I would argue the Bridge Alliance is kind of the hub for that. And then Nanner over here is trying to be the hub, or is the hub of the reformers, those that are working on those structural reforms to the system. And so I think, a lot of our podcast or me interviewing a guest, which is what I've been doing today, but between you and I, let's talk a little bit about that interplay and how important it is that we have both of these kind of territories coming together and working together. What do you, Debliyn, see as like the most the why for why these people need to work together?
Yeah, there are. I'm gonna back up half a step because the Bridge Alliance is trying to be a backbone of the bridging community, the electoral reformers, and then the third sector of the good governance folks. So the folks who are working on either policy, writing policy, or helping elected officials do a better job. Our name happens to be Bridge Alliance, and so people, thumbnail us as a bridging organization, but we're actually trying to do that interplay between these 3 sectors of work, along with a couple others that are not within our membership. So disinformation is another one. Media itself, we're starting to get into a little bit more now. But the bridging that needs to happen is the awareness of and respect for the various theories of change that different organizations and fields within the ecosystem have towards creating what we call healthy self-governance. This nation is a representative democracy, constitutional republic, which means that we, the people, are the government. And there are all of these different needs that are currently not healthy for both informing citizens, for citizens wanting to connect and participate, for elected officials to serve the public instead of special interests, for the structures, the way we run our elections, to be more effective at getting people who will represent us, the people in office, instead of good people running for office and then getting inside of a toxic system that then further perpetuates, what we're starting to call the 2-party doom loop, because it's about power for the sake of power instead of power for the sake of service. And so there's a variety of different theories of change that all need to be supported and resourced simultaneously to meet all of these different needs for the democracy ecosystem to be healthy. So now I just said a whole bunch of big conceptual words, so please ask me a question to break it down into something that might be more understandable.
Well, I think about my friend Eric Liu with Citizen University, who I believe is a Bridge Alliance member. He has a book called The Gardens of Democracy and uses that allegory kind of throughout the book, that democracy is a garden that has to be tended. You have to tend to it in order to have it be the most successful ecosystem you can. You just let it run wild, there's a chance that some aspect of that ecosystem will get out of balance, right? Maybe parasites take over.
I've actually written something about this, calling it kudzu. Like if we're not a good keeper of democracy, the kudzu will take over.
If you've ever had kudzu grow in your yard, you know exactly what that's like. That's right. Well, and I think I say to our members often, that we reformers have to learn how to talk to all parties, right? Because reform measures that many of our members are working on, whether it's ranked choice voting or approval voting or open primaries or amendment to the U.S. Constitution dealing with corruption, you've got to cast a broad net and talk to people. And so, a lot of the efforts that you've been involved in your whole career speak to that ability to have those cross-partisan conversations. And in some cases, if you're trying to convince someone of something, you've got to learn how to connect with them on a very basic level before you can get to that esoteric conversation about policy. Let's talk a little bit about what's coming up for Bridge Alliance here in the future. I know specifically you guys just took on a new relationship with the Fulcrum. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's actually like a huge amount of growth happening with Bridge Alliance right now as we start assembling the pieces of infrastructure that can help this whole democracy ecosystem a little bit more. So the Fulcrum is an online media platform where insiders and outsiders come to meet, talk, and take action towards creating this healthy self-governance that we all want, and really make the electoral reforms that NANR works with connected to the things that everyday people care about in their everyday lives. And so we are adding, we're going to be launching next week. So maybe by the time this gets out, the new Fulcrum website will be live. And we're going to be adding an entire pop culture section that brings in art and music and theater, comedy, as it's related to democracy, and having connections there, because there's a lot of artists who have a lot to say about democracy. And so we're going to provide a voice for that. And then the hope is that once people come into the Fulcrum, maybe through the pop culture door, that they get exposed to some of the electoral reforms and they see how the electoral reforms that NANR proposes, the members of NANR propose, will actually help their lives be better and be better citizens. That's
so exciting. I didn't know that was coming. I'm looking forward to checking that out. Let's also talk a little bit about Citizen Connect, which is, I believe the phrase you've used is the front door to the democracy ecosystem.
Yes, that is the phrase I've used for that. And for years at NANR meetings, at other conferences around, people would always talk about, like, we need a place, we need a portal for people to find out about all the fabulous work that we do. And so at our last summit in 2019, I just asked from the podium, I was like, how many people in here are thinking about or working on a portal? And that 9 hands went up. And from that confluence of 9 people, we embarked on a project, and one of our staff members, Brian Clancy, he's our chief engagement officer, said, I'm going to take this on. We're going to have a portal for the whole ecosystem. And so right as of today, I think we have 421 organizations listed in a directory. So there's 421 organizations that we have found or that have found us that have events or resources for average citizens to use. So the whole idea is that within a couple of clicks, people can find an organization or an event to attend or a toolbox that they can use. And so it's providing at scale a way for people to get involved in a healthy way.
Yeah, it's been a really great tool to see it evolve so quickly since you guys have just launched it, I think just a month or 2 ago. And, one of the things that I like, a feature that is, that's present now, and it gets better with every organization that joins, is being able to search by issue or topic and also by geography, right? So in an ideal world, well, down the road, as more organizations join, it'll be great if folks from every state, every city can join and find something to get involved in their home area and find it all, like you said, just with a few clicks.
Right. Yeah. The whole idea behind this is to make it easy for people to find out about the great work that's been in development, quite frankly, for 20 to 30 years. And most people don't know we exist yet.
Before we go, let's talk a little bit about social media, because I know that you have been kind of working to build out a force for good over there as well.
Yeah, so we have this idea. So this one isn't developed yet, but I want to kind of preview it in case there are folks listening who are interested. And so we wrote up a paper with this idea that disinformation spreads really fast on social media. So what if we could take the tricks of the trade, if you will, from the trolls and use it for good? What if we could take a campaign for spreading disinformation and use it to spread healthy self-governance information? And so we're in the early stages right now of practicing and building up a network of social media accounts under a variety of different brands so that we can kind of figure out how this works. And so my invitation is that if you want to be in on the design team or the experiments that we're starting to run, to let us know, because we'll put you into this Trolls for Good campaign, and maybe we can learn how to do this together.
I mean, that's really exciting. And I think most of our listeners, most people in America, use some sort of social media platform. And over the last couple of years in particular, have probably grown frustrated or disgusted with some aspect of how that ecosystem, a different one, has evolved, right? And it isn't, maybe that garden needs some tending, if you will. And so it sounds like we're trying to put some skilled gardeners out there with a green thumb to help make that space more reflective, one, of facts and data, and also more inviting for useful conversation instead of those, flaming hot takes that people just throw out there.
Yeah, and once we get a little bit more advanced, I expect that we will have I hate to call it an army of gardeners, but a core, a gardener's corps, if you will, to help. And so people will be trained, and they'll just know what to do, and they'll spot disinformation, and they'll know how to dispel it. And there's a whole level that needs some resource right now that we could go into with that, to really take over social media and make it the place of connection and a healthy engagement that its initial why was designed to be, and that has become perverted over time.
Yeah. That makes me think we've got the Salvation Army, now the Gardeners Army, and then there's the actual army. The Merchant Marines are in there as well. All right. Well, my guest today has been Debliyn Molineaux from the Bridge Alliance. Debliyn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Andy, and thanks for doing this. Appreciate the conversation.
Thanks for listening to How to Win Friends and Save the Republic. This podcast is a program of the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. For more information about our organization and how you can join, please visit our website at nonpartisanreformers.org.